Some cities disappear slowly. Others vanish so completely that it almost feels like they were never meant to exist at all. Across the vast landscape of the United States, there are places that once pulsed with life. Industrial giants, where smokestacks darkened the sky and thousands of workers arrived chasing the promise of the American dream. Factories roared, money flowed, entire communities rose almost overnight. But something went terribly wrong. Violence spread through the streets. Crime began to replace law, and the cities that once symbolized progress became something far darker. In some cases, the damage ran so deep that rebuilding seemed impossible. So instead, they were simply left behind. Today, many Americans have never heard their names. Their streets are buried under weeds, forests, highways, or silence. Cracked sidewalks leading nowhere. Abandoned factories collapsing into rust. Entire neighborhoods swallowed by time. Today, we are uncovering 10 American cities that were once among the most dangerous places. Cities whose violent past nearly erased them. In the late 19th century, coal, steel, and railroads were transforming the landscape. Small settlements exploded into booming towns overnight. But rapid growth came with a hidden cost. Most of these towns were built faster than they could be governed. In the shadows of the factories, another kind of power began to grow: gangs, illegal gambling, corruption that spread through city halls. Few places demonstrate that collapse more dramatically than the first city on our list: Centralia, Pennsylvania. At first glance, it looked like the perfect coal town. Mines stretched beneath the hills, filled with miners and tightly packed neighborhoods. But underground, something far more dangerous was growing. In 1962, a fire started inside an abandoned coal mine beneath the town. The flames spread through miles of underground tunnels. The ground began to heat. Toxic gases leaked through cracks in the streets. Roads collapsed. Sinkholes opened. At one point, a 12-year-old boy nearly fell into a burning pit that suddenly opened beneath his feet. Instead of trying to save Centralia, they would relocate the population. Families were paid to leave, homes were demolished, streets were abandoned. Centralia didn't just decline, it became one of the strangest ghost towns in America, a city literally burning beneath the surface. But Centralia was not the only place where prosperity turned into disaster. Hundreds of miles west, Picher, Oklahoma, would face a different catastrophe. In the early 20th century, Picher was one of the most productive mining towns. Beneath lay deposits of lead and zinc, but mining left behind mountains of toxic waste. Huge piles of crushed rock, known as chat, surrounded the community. Children played on them like playgrounds, unaware of the poison. Contamination spread through the soil, water, and even the dust in the air. In 2008, a massive tornado ripped through the town, destroying large sections of what remained. Picher was declared one of the most toxic places. Like Centralia, Picher would be abandoned. Homes were bought out. Schools closed. Entire neighborhoods were emptied. Today, only scattered ruins remain, surrounded by eerie gray hills that still tower over the empty land. But some towns were not destroyed by fire or poison. Some were destroyed by violence itself, like Cairo, Illinois. In Cairo, Illinois. At the southern tip of Illinois, where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi, Cairo once stood in one of the most strategic locations in the entire country. In the 19th century, this small city looked destined for greatness. Riverboats arrived daily. Railroads connected it to the growing industrial network of the Midwest. Merchants, laborers, and entrepreneurs poured into the streets. For a time, Cairo was one of the most promising river cities in America. But beneath the optimism, tensions were growing. Economic inequality, racial divisions, and political corruption began to fracture the community. As the 20th century progressed, the city became increasingly unstable. Violence erupted again and again. Riots broke out. Businesses burned. Entire neighborhoods fell into cycles of fear and retaliation. One of the darkest moments came in 1909, when a mob stormed the local jail and lynched a prisoner. The brutality shocked the nation and marked the beginning of Cairo's long descent into instability. Decades later, racial conflict intensified during the civil rights era. Armed patrols formed on both sides of the community. Streets that once welcomed travelers became battlegrounds of distrust. Businesses closed, families moved away, investment vanished. Slowly, the once busy River City emptied out. Grand hotels that once hosted wealthy travelers stood abandoned. Downtown storefronts were boarded shut. Entire blocks crumbled into silence. Today, Cairo's population is only a fraction of what it once was. Walking through the city now feels like stepping into a place frozen. Massive 19th century buildings still stand along empty streets, their faded facades watching over a town that never fully recovered. But Cairo's story is not unique. Across America's industrial heartland, other cities were facing a similar fate. Few examples are as dramatic as Gary, Indiana. When Gary was founded in 1906, it was designed to be the ultimate industrial city. The steel mills along Lake Michigan were among the largest in the world. Thousands of workers moved into newly built neighborhoods. For decades, Gary thrived. The factories provided stable jobs. Families built entire lives around the rhythm of the mills. The city became a powerful symbol of American industrial strength. But when the steel industry began to decline, Gary was hit with speed. Factories closed, jobs disappeared. Entire communities were left without economic support. Poverty spread quickly, and crime followed. By the 1990s, Gary had developed a national reputation for urban decay. Abandoned houses multiplied. Once crowded streets became eerily quiet. Today, vast sections of the city remain empty. From above, the landscape reveals rows of vacant lots where homes once stood. Broken schools overtaken by weeds, and massive industrial structures slowly rusting beside the lake. Gary still exists, but large parts of the city feel like a shadow of its former self. And yet some forgotten cities vanished even more completely. High in the mountains of California, there is a place, Bodie, California. In the late 1800s, gold fever swept across the mountains of the West. When rich deposits were discovered near Bodie, the town exploded almost overnight. Thousands of prospectors arrived. Within a few years, Bodie had grown into a booming mining town, filled with saloons, gambling halls, and crowded wooden buildings. But Bodie quickly earned a darker reputation. Gunfights were common. Robberies happened in broad daylight. One young girl reportedly wrote in her diary as her family prepared to move there, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bodie." At its peak, Bodie had thousands of residents and dozens of businesses. But the gold eventually began to run dry. As the mines declined, the population started to leave. Fires destroyed large sections of the town. Businesses shut down. Eventually, Bodie was left almost exactly as it had been when the last residents walked away. Today, it remains one of the most famous ghost towns in America. More than 100 structures still stand, preserved in a strange state known as arrested decay. Inside, furniture and personal belongings remain where they were left. It is a haunting reminder of how quickly prosperity can disappear. But some cities were erased by decisions made in government offices. Times Beach, Missouri. In the early 1970s, the small town of Times Beach was struggling with a simple problem: dust. To solve the issue, local officials hired a contractor to spray the roads with oil to keep the dust down. But the oil contained something far more dangerous. It was contaminated with dioxin, one of the most toxic compounds ever produced. For years, the chemical spread. Children played in contaminated areas. Residents unknowingly tracked the poison into their homes. When federal investigators finally discovered the contamination, the situation was already catastrophic. The government made a shocking decision. The entire town would be evacuated. Every home, business, and street abandoned. Times Beach officially ceased to exist as a functioning city. Today, the land has been transformed into a state park. Visitors walk along quiet trails, often unaware that an entire town once stood beneath their feet. If cities like these could rise so quickly and collapse just as fast, could it happen again? Across the Rust Belt, there are communities facing similar pressures today. Economic decline, population loss, infrastructure falling apart. History shows that cities do not disappear overnight. They fade, street by street, factory by factory, family by family. Until one day, what was once a thriving community becomes little more than a memory. The ruins scattered across the landscape remind us that a city's survival depends on something far more fragile, the ability to adapt before history moves on without it. These forgotten cities stand as silent warnings. But rapid growth created another problem. Many of these cities were built faster than they could be controlled. Factories were expanding. Workers were arriving by the thousands. Entire neighborhoods appeared almost overnight. But law enforcement did not grow at the same pace. Police forces were small, courts were overwhelmed. Local governments were often controlled by the very industries that ran the towns. And in the gaps left behind by weak authority, another power began to rise. Organized crime. Illegal gambling houses appeared behind ordinary storefronts. Bootlegging operations flourished in hidden basements. Gangs began to control entire streets. In some places, violence became so common that residents started to accept it as part of daily life. Few cities illustrate this transformation more clearly than East St. Louis, Illinois. At the beginning of the 20th century, East St. Louis was one of the busiest industrial hubs in the Midwest. Railroads, factories, and warehouses stretched along the Mississippi River. Workers arrived searching for employment in the rapidly expanding industries. But the city grew faster than its institutions. Political corruption spread through City Hall. Police forces struggled to maintain order. Tensions between different communities continued to rise. By 1917, the situation exploded into one of the most violent episodes in American urban history. A wave of riots swept through the city. Homes were burned, streets turned into battlegrounds. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed in days of chaos. The violence shocked the nation. But the long-term damage to the city was even greater. Businesses began leaving, families moved away, investment vanished almost overnight. The city that once symbolized industrial opportunity slowly began its descent into decline. Elsewhere in the country, another industrial town was developing its own reputation for lawlessness. Thurmond, West Virginia. Hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains, Thurmond began as a coal town along an important railway line. In the early 20th century, coal trains passed through the valley almost constantly, carrying fuel that powered factories across the nation. Money flowed through the town, and where money flowed, so did vice. Thurmond quickly became known for something other than coal: gambling. Illegal casinos operated openly in hotels and back rooms. Travelers found themselves surrounded by professional gamblers. Stories spread across the region about fortunes lost overnight. Local authorities tried to intervene, but enforcement was inconsistent. The flow of coal money kept the town alive, and many powerful figures had no interest in shutting down the lucrative underground economy. For a time, Thurmond thrived in this strange balance between industry and lawlessness. But that balance would not last forever. Because once crime and instability become embedded in a city, the consequences appear years later, when the economy begins to weaken. And when that moment arrives, the fall can be sudden. Factories close, jobs disappear, and the fragile systems that once held the city together begin to collapse. In the next chapter, we will see how quickly entire cities can unravel once the industries that built them begin to disappear. Because for many of these forgotten places, the real disaster did not happen during their rise. It happened when the money stopped. For years, these cities seemed unstoppable. Factories ran day and night, trains carried endless cargo across the country, mines pulled enormous wealth from beneath the ground. Entire communities built their lives around these industries. Homes were purchased, schools were built, and generations expected the prosperity to last forever. But the strength of these cities depended on something fragile: a single industry. When that industry weakened, the foundations began to crack. The collapse rarely happened all at once. At first, it appeared as small warning signs. A factory closed. A rail line reduced its service. A mine stopped expanding. Families began to leave quietly, searching for opportunities elsewhere. Storefronts that once thrived started to sit empty. Schools lost students. Streets that had once been crowded slowly became quieter. Then the decline accelerated. Few places reveal this process more clearly than Picher, Oklahoma. For decades, Picher was one of the most productive mining towns in the United States. Lead and zinc were essential for American industry. But mining had hollowed out the ground beneath the town. As the years passed, massive underground caverns began to weaken the surface. Buildings shifted, roads cracked, sinkholes appeared without warning. At the same time, the economic value of the mines began to decline. Mining companies left, jobs disappeared almost overnight. With the industry gone, the town had little to replace it. Poverty spread rapidly, and residents began abandoning their homes. The towering waste piles left behind by decades of mining remained, casting long shadows over the empty streets. But Picher's collapse was not only economic, it was environmental. Toxic metals had contaminated the soil and water. Health studies revealed alarming levels of lead poisoning among children in the community. What had once been a prosperous town became contaminated. Slowly, the population faded away. Another powerful example of industrial collapse can be found along the shores of Lake Michigan, Gary, Indiana. For most of the 20th century, Gary existed because of steel. The massive mills provided employment for tens of thousands of workers. Entire neighborhoods were built to house the families who depended on the industry. But global economic shifts began to reshape American manufacturing. Foreign competition increased. Automation reduced the need for workers. Steel production gradually moved to other regions of the world. The factories that had once defined Gary began shutting down. One by one, thousands of jobs disappeared. The impact on the city was devastating. Families moved away in search of work. Businesses closed as customers vanished. Entire neighborhoods began to empty. Abandoned homes multiplied across the landscape. Without a stable economic base, the city struggled to maintain its infrastructure. Schools closed, public services weakened, crime rose as poverty deepened. From above, the pattern became visible. Large sections of the city simply stopped functioning. Blocks of empty houses, vacant lots where buildings once stood, factories slowly rusting beside silent rail lines. Gary did not disappear completely, but parts of the city collapsed so thoroughly that they resemble ghost towns of the American frontier. The same story repeated itself across many industrial regions. When a city is built on a single economic engine, failure can trigger a chain reaction. Jobs vanish, population declines, tax revenue collapses, and once that cycle begins, recovery becomes incredibly difficult. Some cities manage to reinvent themselves, others are not so fortunate. For a few communities, the damage became so severe that governments eventually made an extraordinary decision. Instead of rebuilding the city, they would erase it. In the next chapter, we will explore the places where entire communities were officially abandoned, towns where the government decided the only solution was to relocate the population and leave the streets behind. Most cities decline slowly. Businesses close, families move away, neighborhoods fall silent. But in rare cases, the collapse becomes so severe that authorities make an extraordinary decision. Instead of rebuilding the city, they abandon it entirely. Across the United States, a handful of communities were officially erased, not by war or invasion, but by a combination of disaster and contamination. One of the strangest examples is Centralia, Pennsylvania. For decades, Centralia was a thriving coal town. Miners worked deep underground, extracting anthracite coal that powered factories across the eastern United States. The town had schools, churches, and busy neighborhoods filled with families who expected the mines to support the community for generations. But beneath the streets, the coal seams stretched for miles. In 1962, a fire started in an abandoned mine. At first, it seemed like a manageable accident. Fires in coal mines had occurred before, and officials believed they could contain it. But the flames spread deep into the underground tunnels, feeding on enormous coal deposits hidden beneath the earth. The fire began traveling through the network of abandoned mines, slowly expanding beneath the town itself. Years passed, and the situation grew worse. The ground began to heat from below. Cracks opened in roads and backyards. Toxic gases seeped through. In some places, smoke poured from the earth, as if the ground itself were burning. Attempts to extinguish the fire failed again and again. Eventually, scientists reached a disturbing conclusion. The fire could burn for centuries. The government made a difficult decision. Residents would be relocated. Families received compensation to leave their homes. Houses were demolished. Streets were gradually abandoned. Today, only a few residents remain in what was once a busy mining town. Large portions of Centralia have been reclaimed by nature. Forests have grown over former neighborhoods, and the underground fire continues to burn quietly beneath the hills. But Centralia was not the only town erased from the map. Hundreds of miles away, another community would face a different disaster: Times Beach, Missouri. In the early 1970s, the town of Times Beach struggled with a common problem for small rural communities: dust from unpaved roads. To control the dust, a contractor sprayed the roads with oil waste. At the time, it seemed like an inexpensive and practical solution. What no one realized was that the oil contained a deadly chemical: dioxin, one of the most toxic substances ever produced by industrial processes. For years, the contaminated oil spread through the streets and soil. Residents unknowingly came into contact with the chemical every day. When federal investigators finally discovered the contamination, the results were alarming. The levels of dioxin were so high that long-term exposure posed serious risks. The government made an unprecedented decision. Instead of trying to clean the town, officials would buy every property and relocate every resident. The entire town was evacuated. Homes were demolished. Businesses closed. Streets that once held ordinary suburban life were left empty. Times Beach officially ceased to exist as a functioning city. Today, the land has been transformed into a state park. Visitors walk along quiet trails, often unaware that an entire community once existed beneath their feet. Stories like these reveal something unsettling. Cities are not always permanent. Even in a modern nation, saving a community becomes impossible. And when that happens, the only option left is to leave it behind. But although these cities disappeared from maps, their stories did not vanish, because the physical traces of these places still remain. Ruins scattered across forests, empty streets leading nowhere, and those remnants bring us to the next part of our journey. What remains today, even after communities are abandoned, traces of their existence linger. Ghostly remnants of streets, crumbling buildings, and rusted machinery tell stories that history tried to bury. These are the skeletons of once thriving cities, frozen in time. Centralia, Pennsylvania, still smolders beneath the surface. Smoke rises from cracks in the earth, leading into empty neighborhoods. Walking through the town today feels like stepping into a post-apocalyptic scene where nature has reclaimed what humans once built. The fire underground continues to burn quietly, a constant reminder of a city erased by forces hidden beneath its foundations. Picher, Oklahoma, presents a different picture. Mountains of toxic mining waste dominate the landscape, a gray and eerie reminder of past wealth. Abandoned homes tilt dangerously, and the land itself carries the scars of industrial greed. The environmental devastation ensures no one can return. Gary, Indiana, shows how partial collapse can leave a city unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods stand empty, and schools are closed. Rusting factories loom like monuments. Drone footage captures the scale: streets of empty lots and industrial giants standing silently beside Lake Michigan. Bodie, California, remains in arrested decay. Wooden structures have been preserved almost exactly as they were left decades ago. Walking through Bodie is like a time capsule. Saloons still have furniture, and houses retain the belongings of long-gone residents. Times Beach, Missouri, is now a quiet staple. Trails follow the paths of streets where families once lived. The memory of the town survives in photographs and maps. Visitors walk among trees, unaware of the community that once stood there. Even cities like Cairo, Illinois, carry the ghosts of their past. Abandoned buildings and empty streets echo the consequences of social collapse. Today, these places serve as a cautionary tale. Their ruins are both silent and loud in the history they convey. They remind us that prosperity is fragile, and the decisions we make can echo across decades, leaving scars no one can erase. The skeletal remains of these cities are witnesses. They speak of ambition, greed, and the unstoppable forces of time. Could it happen again? Could today's thriving cities fall into the same shadows as these forgotten places? The stories of these forgotten cities are not just relics of the past. They are warnings. They show us that even in a nation as large and prosperous as the United States, entire communities can vanish when the forces that sustain them collapse. Cities rise on a delicate balance of industry, governance, and community. When one of these pillars fails, the consequences ripple outward. Factories close, jobs disappear, families leave, neighborhoods crumble. And if the decline is severe enough, local authorities may have no choice but to abandon the city entirely. Look at the Rust Belt today. Some cities still survive, but many are fragile. Economic shifts, automation, and globalization continue to erode industrial bases that were once thought unshakable. Crime and social unrest can emerge when opportunity disappears faster than intervention. Infrastructure decays when funding dries up. And the lessons from Centralia, Picher, and Bodie remind us that abandonment is never unthinkable. Environmental disasters are another growing threat. Toxic contamination, climate change, and natural catastrophes can render areas uninhabitable almost overnight. Times Beach shows how a small mistake, left unchecked, can erase an entire community. With increasingly unpredictable weather patterns and industrial hazards, more cities could face similar crises. Even thriving cities are not immune to human error. Political corruption, mismanagement, and social fragmentation can erode the foundations of urban life faster than anyone anticipates. A booming economy can mask underlying instability until the tipping point arrives, leaving chaos in its wake. So yes, it could happen again. Perhaps not everywhere, but in the wrong combination of economic collapse, environmental disaster, and social unrest, history could repeat itself. Today's thriving towns may one day become the ghost cities of the future, their names erased, their streets empty, their stories forgotten. The key lesson is clear. Cities are more than buildings and roads. They are living ecosystems, sustained by careful balance. Prosperity alone is never enough. Governance, foresight, and adaptability determine whether a city survives or vanishes into the shadows of history. As we look at the skeletal remains of America's lost cities, we are reminded of the fragility of civilization itself. Every abandoned street, every rusted factory, every overgrown lot is a testament to what happens when ambition outpaces stability. And while the ghosts of these forgotten cities are silent, they speak louder than any living metropolis. They warn us that the line between thriving and forgotten is thinner than we think, and that time, for those who are unprepared, can be the ultimate eraser. History is not kind to the unready, and for some cities it will not wait.